Joe Hendry. I believe in Joe Hendry.
Okay, shove it, squad. The TNA World title is officially in the hands of a WWE wrestler for the very first time. Trick Williams from NXT was the man to do it. But we're not here to talk about him, rather the man that he's taken the title from. And I believe that this world title reign has been a disappointment, a waste of time, and sadly just not as good as any of us had hoped for. The question I'm asking today, and the question that everybody's asking is, do you still believe in Joe Hendry? Now, despite what you're about to see in this video, I still believe in Joe Hendry, and I think that the WWE would do a much better job with him. At the same time, I do believe the WWE involvement is largely why this title reign hasn't gone so well in TNA. Let's get into why. Joe Hendry already had a number of achievements under his belt before rising to wrestling fame. A black belt in judo, almost the lead singer of a band, a degree in marketing, and a winner at British freestyle wrestling. Despite all of that, nobody really cared about Joe Hendry until 2016 when Hendry started wrestling for What Culture Pro Wrestling. This is where he started to build his name and brand. Hendry realised good wrestling might not be enough to make his name, so he used his marketing degree and started making semi-viral wrestling songs for YouTube. This is actually how the Hawk first became aware of Joe Hendry. Say that he had an upcoming indie match against someone like Scotty 2 Hotty, he would make a song and a video to make fun of his opponent. These songs became a staple of Hendry's wrestling career and often have become more of a highlight than his actual wrestling matches. This is something he still does to this day, and it's helped him make a massive fan base. It isn't actually the first time that Joe Hendry's been in TNA either. He actually had a blink and you'd miss it run and company back in 2018. He was paired with Grado because they were both Scottish, and he quickly stole Grado's girlfriend Katie Lee. You could see back then he was still trying to figure out his career, but to me his star qualities were still obvious. It's strange seeing him before his days of Blonde Just for Men. After leaving TNA, he did some Ring of Honor before returning to TNA once again, and this TNA run would prove to be much more successful. In only his fourth TNA match, he captured their digital media title, a very fitting belt for this man. The belt is now inactive, but Hendry ended up holding it for 266 days, which is still the record. He also formed a pretty successful tag team with Japanese wrestler Yuya Uemura. The team name was Joya, and they were fan favourites with comedy elements, and it definitely felt a lot closer to the Joe Hendry that we all know and love. Now, the thing you've got to all understand here is that TNA was coming out of the dark times where they couldn't do a thing right. The show had felt dead for a number of years, but suddenly they had this guy on the show who could light up a room and make things popular, seemingly all off his own back. Joe Hendry gave TNA fans hope that their show wouldn't always suck so badly. Whilst he was not putting on 5-star classics, he clearly had the most aura on the show, and his segments made TNA feel more big time, benefiting from a star like him. During his time in Ring of Honor, he would enter to the song I Believe. Hendry feels like he wasn't really over in ROH, but his song was. He never truly gave up on this song, and whilst in TNA, he added the Joe Hendry persona to the song with the funny clapping and mannerisms and the music video. In 2023, 5 years after the song was created, Joe Hendry peaked at number 4 in the UK Top 40 singles chart. This man was no longer just a wrestler, he'd made a successful song too. That marketing degree was working overtime for Joe. The song was versatile too, and it didn't get old because Joe would change the lyrics around and make other songs up all the time to insult his opponents. Joe Hendry's entrance almost became the biggest part of the TNA show. TNA somehow got the incredible idea to push Joe Hendry higher up the card due to his huge fan backing. They hoped that Joe Hendry's viral success could lead to more viewers on the TNA show, and really, this is where the problems start to arise. Because, man, they took forever to pull the trigger on his push. You'd think you'd want to hurry up with Joe Hendry's music topping charts, but TNA just didn't seem to pull the trigger. And it didn't help that at the exact same time as Hendry's rise, Dolph Ziggler had just joined TNA as a massive free agent signing. TNA decided to go with the proven WWE wrestler, and Dolph would capture the world title before Hendry, who was also part of the same match. It was around this time that Joe Hendry started to appear semi-regularly in NXT thanks to the deal between TNA and the WWE. Why wouldn't they be interested in a wrestler who seemed to fully embrace sports entertainment? But back in TNA land, Hendry had to work his way back up the card. It seemed to be going much better in NXT, where he became the #1 contender for the NXT title. WWE were testing the waters with Joe, and he proved to be popular with their audience. He main evented an NXT pay-per-view No Mercy, but he was unable to take the NXT belt from Ethan Page. This seemed to act as a sort of wake-up call for TNA, and they started pushing Joe, and he started winning matches against the TNA upper card. He was at the peak of his popularity here, and everybody felt that the time was right for a Joe Hendry world title run. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited some more, as Joe did seemingly anything except compete for the world title. When he eventually did become the number 1 contender again, surely the time had to be right. He'd be facing Dolph Ziggler in the main event of Bound for Glory 2024. Unfortunately, fans have crapped on this match due to a number of factors, but it's rated as the worst match of the show. High standards because you'd think it would be a botchy mess when it wasn't. The issues were as follows. The match wasn't booked as the main event of the night. The match was overbooked with referee nonsense. JBL randomly interferes with clotheslines from hell. Who remembers that storyline which never went anywhere? And Dolph Ziggler beats Joe Hendry. It's not what the fans wanted to see. There had been loads of signs in the crowd saying they would riot if Joe Hendry didn't win. No riot took place on the night. Ultimately, the match under-delivered and the wrong guy won. This was the time for Hendry and it would damage his momentum. Hendry spent the next couple of months once again fighting in the mid-card. They even had him in the annual Turkey Bowl match. He felt pretty far from the world title picture. It almost felt like TNA was trying to keep him hidden from the WWE. They already knew about him. At Final Resolution, Hendry did manage to once again become the number 1 contender for the world title. This match was received much better and fans once again believed in Joe Hendry. TNA surely wouldn't make the same mistake twice? No, they didn't do it twice. He did beat Dolph Ziggler for the TNA World title at Genesis 2025. I honestly felt really happy for Joe Hendry. After following much of his career, I knew that Joe had a much tougher battle to become a star in wrestling. He'd grafted on the UK Indies, hustled with his music, battled in the US Indies, and after almost a decade of fighting, he was finally getting some recognition. We were all buzzing for Joe. He was the biggest name that TNA had, and other companies were envious. He was going to turn around TNA's fortunes, and he was their homegrown hero. Problem was, his world title reign kind of sucked. I was so happy for Joe, I kept thinking about all the possibilities of him as world champion. A wrestler TNA could build around, feature him in as many segments as possible, give him some good feuds, and milk his name in the good name of TNA. He was the most well-rounded guy they had after years of making do with lesser wrestlers. It sure felt like TNA was back on the map. Instead, it felt like they decided to take a nap during his world title reign. You only have to have a quick glance at Joe Hendry's Wikipedia page to figure out what happened next. He wins the TNA World title, and then there's basically no mention of TNA again. Let's get into why. First off, Joe Hendry was a fighting TNA World Champion, at least to begin with he was. He defended the world title on Impact against Matt Cardona and Jake something. No, I've not forgotten his last name, that genuinely is his surname. Well, that's all well and good, but the matches were poorly received. The main issue is they were just random world title matches with no storyline or build. In fact, Hendry was hardly on the TNA show except for when he was wrestling. When WWE had Stone Cold Steve Austin at the height of his popularity, he was all over the show, but TNA seemingly didn't want to do the same thing with Hendry. Then Joe Hendry had the biggest moment of his career up to this point, where he entered the WWE Royal Rumble 2025, coming in at number 15. He got to see how much the fans appreciated him before getting bashed out by the big dog. Once again, the WWE clearly wanted to test the waters here, and as it turned out, Hendry got one of the biggest ovations of the Royal Rumble. It must have felt really depressing returning to the mould of the TNA locker room after all of that. But Hendry is used to mould. He's from Scotland and he persevered. It was great to have Joe back on the show, and surely with his now improved star power, TNA was surely going to push him hard. Nope. Instead, Elijah, the former Elias from WWE, was now in TNA. They started doing a storyline where Elijah really wanted to be friends with Joe Hendry, and they had a bond over their appreciation of music. It does sound like it makes sense and it could lead to some entertaining segments, but it rarely did. We got maybe one or two. But it was disappointing. Instead, it mostly just took the focus off Joe Hendry, especially with Elijah being the new kid on the block. Almost every week, Elijah would tell Joe he genuinely liked him and wasn't here to try and backstab him and take his world title away. And he stayed true to his word. Nothing happened except Elijah trying to match star power with Hendry. It was unfocused. Hendry decided to defend his TNA World title again in some more random matches on Impact. Notice how Joe Hendry always defends his belt in random matches with no storyline? That'll be a show of things to come. He continued hanging around with Elijah every week and nothing was happening. This should have been a license to print money, but TNA seemingly couldn't be bothered to put any effort in. This pairing was underwhelming and confusing. Where were all the viral videos? Where were the entertaining segments? Why is Elijah taking the focus of the world champion?
You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for you. Miles and miles from Enough of this!
Shouldn't Joe Hendry be at the start of the show, in the middle of the show, and at the end of the show? But no, we might get a segment of Joe Hendry and Elijah kissing each other's asses backstage, and then there might be a random Joe Hendry match, but that was it. He felt like an afterthought on the show. Joe Hendry was the biggest star TNA had had in years, yet they seemed to be allergic to using him properly. It gets worse though, because he won that belt in January, but he still hadn't even defended it on pay-per-view 3 months later. Where were the storylines? Wouldn't someone want to get the rub off working with a star like Joe Hendry? After multiple months, he finally had the belt on pay-per-view. That is shocking. How could they do this to their biggest star? Imagine if WWE had done this with Cena in the 2010s. No, he was always the focus of the show because he was the main guy. Hendry was always shoved in multi-man matches, taking the focus off of him. They also had him out with a shoulder injury, but unlike badasses from the past, Hendry didn't fight through the pain or continue raising hell in the building. He just quietly disappeared to look after his shoulder. He did manage to top his previous career highlight at the Royal Rumble when he was booked to face Randy Orton at WrestleMania. This was originally a big secret, and it's said that Randy pushed for the match. Hendry was still bringing in some serious numbers on social media, so it made sense for the WWE to make him a part of the show. Hendry had expected to hand out a slammy or do something pointless on the show, but instead he faced the Viper. The match itself has mixed reviews as Hendry was squashed in 3 minutes, but he did get to land some moves, and the turnaround into the RKO was a nice spot. Orton is a WWE legend, I'm not sure what people expected. The match was seen by like 25 million people too. He once again returned to the mould of the TNA locker room, but this time with renewed optimism. He knew it would only be temporary. He finally defends his TNA World title on pay-per-view in a triple threat, and once again the match suffered from the same issues as literally all his other TNA World title defences. There was no proper storyline other than people saying they wanted a title shot. It was just people being surprise mystery challenges or people coming from the WWE asking for a title shot. Ethan Page came over from NXT to be one of the challengers because he'd already beaten Hendry before, and Kazarian made it into a triple threat. I like this match personally, but once again, it's drawn complaints online for not being pay-per-view worthy. That's not my opinion, but it is sadly a common denominator throughout his title run. And of course, Trick Williams just randomly attacks Hendry to end the show and set up the next title match. And as it turned out, this would be the setup for Hendry's final TNA World title match, and it was yet another feud with no real storyline other than random WWE guy attacks TNA champion and then he gets a title shot. At this point, Joe Hendry was regularly appearing on NXT like he was a member of the roster. You kind of have to watch both NXT and TNA to understand what's going on. It was mostly just both Trick and Hendry attacking each other. Joe also continued to wrestle in bland and pointless matches for TNA, still hanging around with Elijah and the Hardy Boys. Oh yeah, and he continued to not defend his title on pay-per-view, meaning most of the events this year have been subpar. The world title should always be on the line at the pay-per-view, barring any enormous matches with storyline consequences. At NXT Battleground, Hendry lost the world title to NXT wrestler Trick Williams. Kind of a bizarre choice. It'll probably get Trick Williams some exposure from name recognition. The match was once again insulted online for not being good enough standards for NXT. On the other hand, TNA fans were livid that their world title had essentially been captured by a WWE developmental wrestler. I'm not knocking Trick's ability, but that's essentially what he is. It made TNA look small time, which it is, but Joe Hendry being the champion was supposed to have raised the company up. This ended Hendry's world title reign at 126 days, which is actually one of the shorter TNA reigns in recent times. He defended the belt once successfully on pay-per-view. Not good. This is the part you're probably all waiting for, my meltdown. When I first heard the news, I was angry. Then I took a long hard think about it and I thought, who cares? TNA weren't doing anything incredible with him anyway, and he's off to the WWE no matter what. Plus, when a TNA talent like Mike Santana gets the belt back from Trick Williams, you'd hope that would get him and TNA some more exposure. I'm not saying this whole thing is a good thing. I'm just saying it's not worth getting upset about. Can you not see what's happening here? Hendry isn't signed to the WWE, but he's already had 3 or 4 huge moments in the company, proving that they will use him how they want regardless of his TNA status. So what went wrong? 2 things. TNA took far too long to pull the trigger when he was at his hottest. They incorrectly chose Dolph Ziggler at the time when Hendry was the one that they wanted. Once Hendry did get the title, it must be one of the most unfocused title runs of all time. No storylines, random challengers, rarely defending on TNA pay-per-view, constantly flip-flopping between NXT and TNA, often not even appearing on TNA. It felt like TNA didn't build anything around him because they knew he wouldn't be theirs for much longer. It must have made it tricky for them booking him when he kept popping up in WWE so frequently. He also just hasn't seemed to wrestle that much. Perhaps he's trying to ensure that he stays fit and healthy so he can get that big money WWE contract. And when he has wrestled, it's not been anything crazy. His matches are mostly lowballed online. Joe Hendry as champion was unfortunately a letdown. We all believed and waited, and when it finally happened, TNA did nothing with it. Seriously, how could you not make this man the focus of your entire show? I am not exaggerating, some shows he literally just had a 1-minute video package, and that was his whole appearance on Impact. You don't do that with your biggest star. This whole thing would have worked out so much better if there had been some heat between NXT and TNA. Joe could have been their proud champion representing TNA, but also bringing the fight to NXT. A locker room leader and a motivator. Imagine a sort of Survivor Series elimination match where Joe is left battling the odds, but he still manages to win the match. That would have elevated him far more than random title matches which nobody remembers the next day. The same thing could apply for world title defenses against NXT guys. These WWE guys are invading and Joe doesn't want them here and he's going to defend his company. But really and truly, I'd rather see some actual effort put into storylines surrounding him. We never got to see him play a serious character. Can he do that? We never got to see him angry or intense. I think this is something that the WWE is going to be able to do much better than TNA. They will also lean in better to his sports entertainment style. He just isn't a 5-star match wrestler and he's going to stand out a bit in NXT. But WWE will figure out a way to book him to his strengths and hide his weaknesses. Hendry's TNA contract expires later this year. Kinda feels irrelevant anyway. Given TNA's track record, they aren't going to suddenly have something awesome for him to do. He'll probably play it safer than he ever did before until his TNA contract expires. I know I would. But how do you guys think Hendry will get on in the WWE? What's his potential? I see him as a kind of LA Knight level. I think that's probably where he'll get to, but it could get a bit further, you never know. I am still a Joe Hendry fan. I still believe. I always have done, but his TNA World title run was sadly not what I'd hoped for. Do you still believe, or did his World title run make you heave?